It was a tough loss for the Orioles in Toronto on Tuesday night, but what was even tougher was the news we got right before first pitch. Grayson Rodriguez scratched from his start with a lat issue. If he's out for a while, this could be a huge problem for the Orioles. I'll break it all down coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, August 7th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we will recap the Orioles' loss to the Blue Jays on Tuesday night, tell you what went right for the O's with Jackson Holliday homering, and what went wrong with Gregory Soto struggling, and a tough eighth inning for the Orioles offense. But then we'll talk about the biggest news. Grayson Rodriguez scratched from his start just 10 minutes before first pitch, what it means for the Orioles right now, and what it means for their rotation moving forward. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. So we'll kick off today's episode with a look at the loss Tuesday in Toronto. I am still struggling with my voice. It has been fluctuating over the past 2 weeks. It's been a little tough. So if you hear some cracks, some whatevers, that's the case at the moment right here. We're getting over the rest of the sickness, let me tell you. But the cough and the voice has been the last thing. It's been a bit of a struggle for a daily podcaster, but we're moving through it here on the Locked On Orioles podcast. Let's talk O's loss. Final score from the Rogers Center, or whatever it's called now, in Toronto. It is the Blue Jays 5 and the Orioles 2 in game one of a 3-game set. North of the border, the Orioles with the loss fall to 67 and 47 on the year. And unfortunately, the Yankees, they got rained out against the Angels on Tuesday night. So the O's do, for now, fall back into second place, although just a half game behind New York in the AL East standings. So now I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles 5-2 loss to the Blue Jays on Tuesday. The first thing you need to know is Grayson Rodriguez was scratched right before this start. Rodriguez was supposed to go in this game for the Orioles, and then about 10 minutes before first pitch, it might have been even less than 10 minutes before first pitch, we got the news that Rodriguez had been scratched. Now, we weren't really sure what it was. There was video on the Masson broadcast of him saying to Orioles pitching coach Drew French, "I don't feel right," and then basically going back into the clubhouse and not starting the game. Now, it's always good to wait until you get official announcement from the Orioles. I know there were rumors swirling about, it was just sick. He was just throwing up in the bullpen. Like, no. That's not coming from anything credible. Wait until the team announces it, or at least a credible reporter announces it as well. And unfortunately, it was worse than that. The Orioles called it right lat discomfort. I am recording just as the game ended here on Tuesday night, so I'm kind of scouring the internet a bit, just waiting for Brandon Hyde to give some notice. I'm sure he would. But kind of just waiting for that final line from Brandon Hyde about what exactly is going on with Grayson Rodriguez. But the lat discomfort is not a good sign, because that is a muscle in your back, and you need your back for everything. But specifically for Grayson Rodriguez, it's an injury that's already held him out. Remember back in 2022, he left to start in AAA right before he was seemingly about to be called up. It was a lat injury. It was a grade 2 lat strain, which we're not at that point yet. Grade 2 is pretty serious. And it kept him out for basically the rest of the 2022 season. He returned to throw a few rehab starts late in September, but that was it. Never got himself to the big leagues that year. So that is the concern in the back of our minds. Obviously, if I get any other update while I'm recording, I'll talk about it. If not, tomorrow's episode will be when we really dive into it, if we get a little more information on what's going on with Grayson Rodriguez. But the second thing you need to know is Albert Suarez stepped in and stepped up. And he was, if we're being honest, he was pretty amazing in this emergency fill-in start for the Orioles. Suarez takes the ball, who, to be fair, has been a starter for a good chunk of this season. Has not been working as a starter, although, he started last Sunday against the Padres. Then he pitched in relief on Thursday against the Guardians and hadn't pitched since. So although he only threw, about 3 innings on Thursday, He's still been on a starter's rest load, so that allowed him to go a little deeper than maybe another emergency spot starter would go into one game, and that was very, very helpful to the Orioles. That doesn't mean, though, that he had to pitch well. And yet he did. 5 scoreless innings from Albert Suarez, 2 hits, 6 Ks, and 2 walks, only 2 hard hit balls from Blue Jays batters. I mean, he threw 73 pitches, and at a normal time, you'd say 73 pitches, 5 scoreless. Why is he not going back out there for the 6th? But he was clearly not really built up at the time to go more than maybe 75 pitches. So to get 5 scoreless was honestly incredible. The off speeds were solid. That was one of the best fastballs I've seen Suarez have all season. That pitch was really impressive for him on Tuesday night. And again, he gave the Orioles everything, gave them a chance to win. I know it's a little bit of a depleted Blue Jays team at this point, but it's still a solid offense, at least that you're facing. And he was fantastic. Like, you can't say enough. We'll get to it a little bit later about what Suarez's role could be if Rodriguez is actually injured. But for him to give the Orioles that start in that moment, I mean, it's tough enough to learn like the morning of that you're making a spot start. To learn 5 minutes before first pitch that you're making a spot start, that is almost impossible to get that and then throw 5 scoreless. And that is what Suarez did. Just, you cannot undersell what he did for the Orioles on Tuesday night. Third thing that you need to know from this loss is that unfortunately Gregory Soto was not so good for the O's. As I mentioned, it was the easy call at that point to pull Suarez from the game. Birch Smith, who's been really good, came in, got a couple of outs, then allowed a single with 2 outs to Vladimir Guerrero Jr., with the Orioles leading 1-0 in the bottom of the 6th inning. And Brandon Hyde went to Gregory Soto. Now, for Soto, it would be his 3rd appearance with the Orioles since they acquired him from the Phillies at the trade deadline. And they've been 2 very different appearances. The first one, he gave up 4 runs and recorded 1 out and was a disaster. The last one, he wasn't dominant, but he looked like eons better in that last appearance against Cleveland. So it's like, all right, this is a pretty good spot for Soto. There's already 2 outs in the inning. You've got lefty, righty, lefty due up in the Blue Jays order. Soto, despite some struggles this year, has been really good against left-handers. The first lefty he was facing, Spencer Horwitz, has been terrible against lefties this year. Even if Soto just comes in, gets 1 out, and doesn't come back out for the 7th, it would be a really good confidence-boosting outing for the Orioles' new left-hander. Unfortunately, a confidence boost is not what Soto got right there. He allowed a single to Horwitz and then a 3-run homer to Alejandro Kirk, just his 3rd home run of the year. Things didn't really get better after that. Issued a walk, gave up a 2-run double, and all of a sudden you looked up and it was a 5-run 6th inning before Soto finally got that final out in the 6th. Now, on one hand, like the 2-run double later in the inning, like that was a good slider way out of the zone and just somehow poked on a little blooper down the line. The pitch to Kirk wasn't bad. He just put a really good swing on it. But the issues are not as much the hits he's given up. It's the walks and it's the command. And even on the batter, he ended up intentionally walking in the inning. It wasn't like a straight intentional walk. He went 3-0 and then just said, let me put the righty on to face the lefty, because he's been just much better against lefties this year and in his career. But he will not be this bad because he just hasn't been this bad. Even when he struggled in Philly, like there's only been 1 outing Gregory Soto had in Philadelphia this year that was worse. He gave up 5 runs in a 1/3 of an inning against the Rockies all the way back in April. The 2 outings with the O's that have each been 4 earned runs, that is number 2 and 3 in terms of runs allowed of his 2nd and 3rd worst outings of the year. Like every other outing had been 3 runs or less. So he's not going to be this bad consistently, but I don't know if you could say he's had a good outing yet. I would say what he looked like in his 2nd outing in Cleveland was solid, and the other 2 have been absolute disasters. I don't think you can argue that whatsoever. The stuff is just too good. The slider's been amazing. The sinker's at 99. For him to give up 4 runs every time he goes out there, I mean, no major league ready reliever gives up 4 runs every time he goes out there. It's not going to happen. But you're in kind of a weird spot now with Soto because you're going to need to try to ease him back into something close to high leverage while you're kind of doing the same thing with Craig Kimbrell right now, who, you know, he did put up a scoreless inning, which was nice to see on Tuesday night in very low leverage, trailing 5-1. But Soto's put you in a tough spot. He will get better, but it's good to know he doesn't have a lot of time to get better. He'll be better than this. I just hope Danny Coulomb can return before this season ends. 4th thing you need to know from this one is that Jackson Holliday had to go out there and break up a no-hitter. He was like, do I have to do everything myself around here? No-hitter through 5 innings for Chris Bassett, who was honestly just dominant in this game. He goes 7+, 2 runs, 9 Ks, 3 hits. This is the version of Chris Bassett that I wanted the Orioles to sign 2 years ago. This is the version of Chris Bassett I wanted the Orioles to trade for at this deadline. Unfortunately, the Blue Jays did not make him available. But when he is on, he is on. And it is fun to watch. 5 hitless innings for him, Well, Jackson changed all of that to lead off the sixth. Solo home run for his third since being recalled. 102 off the bat, 410 feet on a cutter right down the middle. He's just so locked in right now. Rest of the offense, though, just wasn't giving the Orioles anything basically through those 7 innings. And that one Jackson swing, that one run was not going to win the game. It was nice to get the lead, but it's just really nice to see the way Jackson is swinging the bat. I mean, just crushing home runs like that, just kind of expecting him to do things like that. Yeah, that is pretty awesome to watch. But the Orioles did get one more chance to score in this game when they actually did score their other run. That was in the top of the 8th inning. And that's going to be the 5th thing you need to know is talking about that 8th inning. But I'm actually going to do it in the next segment because I want to break down some of the moves made in the 8th because there are some of you out there who are ready to send Brandon Hyde onto the iceberg and send him out to sea. We're going to talk about why Hyde made the decisions he did in the 8th inning, what data went behind them, which ones I agree with, which ones I don't. We'll get to that coming up right after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. For me, the most fun and exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. How do you play? Well, all you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. Turn $10 into 1,000 watching Team USA, basketball, soccer, tennis, golf. Add all the players in, win money. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So let's talk about it. Top of the 8th inning, Orioles get Chris Bassitt out of the game. They get a walk, a couple of singles. They load the bases with nobody out, down 5-1. The Blue Jays take Bassitt out and go to basically their one of 2 good relievers they have left on their roster in left-hander Yenesis Cabrera. They bring in Cabrera to face Jackson Holliday, the lefty, who is due up with the bases loaded and no outs. And Brandon Hyde goes to a pinch hitter. He goes to Austin Slater, who the Orioles have brought in, has swung it well, and has hit lefties incredibly well throughout his career. Slater walks, brings in a run. It's now 5-2. Bases loaded with nobody out. Ramon Arias then hits. He strikes out. Then, with Colton Cowser, the lefty up, Brandon Hyde goes to another righty and Kobe Mayo off the bench. Kobe Mayo strikes out. Then there's 2 outs with the bases loaded. And then Anthony Santander grounds out to end the inning. The Orioles only score 1. It's 5-2. That ends up being the final score. Now, I haven't been very much on Twitter lately. I went on to get Grayson Rodriguez updates. And the one we did have, unfortunately, from Brandon Hyde is that he will go back to Baltimore to get more imaging and testing done to kind of determine the severity of this lat injury. So hoping all of that comes out mostly clean and he's only out for a little bit of time here. But besides that, of course, I decided to tweet because it's always a bad idea, but I haven't done it in a while. So why not? Twitter's not real life, but I have never seen so much negative feedback about a move that Brandon Hyde made. And you get used to it. First of all, on the internet, it's not the real world. Second of all, people overreact like crazy on anything that happens with any sports team, but especially managerial decisions in baseball. The general takeaway from your average fan is that when my team loses, it's my manager's fault. When my team wins, my manager had nothing to do with it. Generally, it falls somewhere in the middle, how much the manager has to do with the team winning and losing. There's a lot of input from the front office about lineup decisions and matchup decisions. We've talked about that a lot on this pod. The manager is someone there to make some in-game decisions, but also curate a great clubhouse and kind of be a leader of men and put together a good coaching staff and surround himself with good people who can help the team win. If you don't think Brandon Hyde has done a good job of that since he took over in 2019, you're not paying attention. He just won 100 games last year, won Manager of the Year, and took this team from terrible to winning the AL East. If you're going to discredit him for some losses, you have to credit him for wins. If you're going to discredit him for the moves he made in the 8th inning on Tuesday, then you also have to credit him for making basically the same exact moves in the 8th inning Saturday night in Cleveland when he went to all the pinch hitters in that inning and the Orioles ended up scoring 4 runs to pull away in that game. Eloy Jimenez was red hot and Brandon Hyde pinch hit for him in that spot to get the matchup he wanted, and Adley Rutschman delivered with a triple to bring in 2 runs. Now, you could say that Eloy Jimenez is not Colton Cowser or Jackson Holliday, and Adley Rutschman is not Kobe Mayo. I get all those things. But Brandon Hyde was managing Saturday with the exact same playbook as he did on Tuesday. One worked, and there's not a peep. One didn't work, and now it's Brandon Hyde's the dumbest man alive and the worst manager in Major League Baseball. I'm not arguing that he didn't make a bad call. Let me tell you what I think about Brandon Hyde's moves. I would have pinch hit for Colton Cowser. I would not have pinch hit for Jackson Holliday. Let me tell you why. There are two righties on the bench that you would really go to in that spot. You're not going to go to James McCann. So really you have Kobe Mayo and you have Austin Slater on the bench. Now, for Jackson Holliday, he only has one hit against lefties all season. Now, it's not a lot of sample size. It's like 9 plate appearances, but it's only one hit. And you get why you maybe don't want him up there in that big spot. But the fact that he's been swinging the bat so well and the confidence is rising, and you've let him at least face lefties a few times. Now, not in very big spots, but he still faced a few lefties over the past week since he came up. I think it's right to just leave him in there and let him go there. However, I would have then immediately gone to Austin Slater instead of Colton Cowser. Now, the Jackson Holliday thing, Austin Slater against a lefty, that's a good decision. And that one worked. He walked. He kept the inning going. He made it 5-2. I would have just let Holliday hit. I would have let Arias hit. And then I would have went to Slater for Cowser because it's an easier 1-for-1 matchup there. You just throw Slater right into center field. And the other thing is, although Cowser has gotten better against lefties as the season has gone on, he's actually up to a 105 WRC plus against left-handers this year. He strikes out an absurd amount against lefties. Colton Cowser this year is striking out 36% of the time against left-handers. A 36% strikeout rate is basically like Joey Gallo levels of strikeouts. Like that's a crazy amount. So if he's striking out more than a third of the time against left-handers, and he's coming up in a spot with bases loaded and one out, and you're trailing 5-2, what you really can't have is a strikeout. Now, you really don't want a ground ball double play, but what you really can't have is a strikeout. So I'm totally on board with pinch hitting for Colton Cowser in that spot. However, I would have rather it been Holliday hits, Arias hits. You go Slater for Cowser because he's probably not going to strike out against lefties. He's going to give you a good at bat. And then you don't have to throw Kobe Mayo in that kind of crazy spot. Now, I get that Mayo gives you the platoon advantage, but he's been 0 for 9. We know he has some strikeout issues. Going strikeout guy for strikeout guy is not the move I would have made. And I think that's a lot of pressure to put on Mayo to come through for his first hit in a situation that big. Now, the players that he put out there didn't execute. Like Arias he was non-competitive in that strikeout after Slater walked. He could have done more than that. Santander could have come through. Kind of a tough spot for Mayo, but the other guys could have come through more. That's the other thing here. But that's what I would have done. I would have left Holliday, would have left Arias. I would have hit Slater for Cowser, and then you kind of have your guys up in the middle of the order with Santander and Henderson and others. And I just wouldn't have put Mayo into the game in that big of a spot. So that's what I would have done. But either way, there's reasoning behind doing both moves he did. Again, Jackson's only had one hit against lefties. Cowser has an insane strikeout rate against left-handers. That is why he's making the moves he is. But I think he made, as I mentioned, I think that was the wrong move that he made in terms of the full swaps in that 8th inning. However, a wrong move does not make you a bad manager. And, all this vitriol comes out. Oh, all he does is play the matchups and it never works. You have to go to 3 days ago, 3 days ago, when all he did in the 8th inning was play the matchups. And that is the reason why the Orioles won that game on Saturday. So if you want to say Brandon Hyde is the reason the Orioles lost Tuesday, you have to turn around and be able to say he is the reason why they won on Saturday. And if you think that Brandon Hyde is a bad manager, despite winning 100 games last year and winning manager of the year and taking this team to an AL East title and building up this clubhouse, and he's been amazing for these guys and keeping them together, especially through the ups and downs of this season, if you still think he's a bad manager, I don't know what to tell you. Is he the best manager in Major League Baseball? I don't think so. I don't really know where he falls in. It's really tough to grade out managers in general. But to say he should be fine, let's go ahead and fire the reigning manager of the year, who's got his team sitting in first place for a good chunk of this year, had his team winning the division last year, has been amazing for this clubhouse. The guys love him. He stands up for his guys. He's got a great relationship with the front office. Let's go ahead and fire him in the middle of a playoff race in August for one bad decision he made in a game. Let's go ahead and do that. That's a real smart decision right there. you can say, as I just did, he made the wrong decision with the pinch hitting options he went for in the 8th inning. And you know what? He's still a good manager because you make mistakes in your job. This comparison is going to make you even more angry. We're going to go with it anyway. Buck Showalter made the wrong decision in this same ballpark in the wild card game. Buck Showalter was still a good manager for a whole lot of reasons and a whole much bigger sample size. The other thing is Brandon Hyde's not losing his job. I don't know why you would think that would even happen here. I understand, like, I love this team. I want to see this team win. Like, I get getting excited, getting frustrated, getting upset when they lose. Like, I get all that stuff. But you don't take in the entire sample size. And instead, you take in 1/8 inning where he made the wrong move. I'm not defending the moves that he made. I said I would have done it a different way. I'm also not the manager of the Orioles, but I would have done it a different way. But it's like, it's a lot. Like, let's take it back a step. He has gotten this team to this point, and a lot of it has been him. And again, if you're going to blame him for that, you got, and you don't hear a peep out of anyone. Wow, great move by Brandon Hyde to use those pinch hitters on Saturday night. No. It's just when it doesn't work. And you know what? If Austin Slater would have gapped one, if Kobe Mayo's first career hit would have been a 2-run double to make it a 1-run game, no one would have said anything, because this is the other issue. It's a lot of results-based complaining and not process-based. I think the process was wrong here, and the results were wrong. A lot of times the results are wrong and the process is right. That's what a lot of baseball is. You do the right process and you fail. The old saying, 7 times out of 10. That's a lot of what baseball is. I didn't agree with this process fully, but Brandon Hyde has built up all of this goodwill with what he's done. He's going to be the manager of the Orioles for years to come. This is where we are. He made a wrong move. Every single manager in Major League Baseball has made multiple wrong moves this year. And guess what? That doesn't make them bad managers. Bad managers are people who can't control a clubhouse. Bad managers are people who throw their players under the bus. Bad managers are people who don't listen to what their GMs and the analytics people and the scouts and everyone in the organization have to say. Bad managers are people who don't cultivate good relationships with their coaching staff or with the media. That's a bad manager. Brandon Hyde doesn't fall into any of those categories. He made a mistake. The Orioles lost a game. Would have been nice if they scored, more than 1 run in the first 7 innings. That would have probably made it easier to make some decisions later in the game. Would have been nice if Gregory Soto could have gotten anybody out. That would have been helpful as well. That's where we are. Can't wait for the comment section on this one. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Brandon Hyde's moves as the Orioles lost the game. But everybody being upset, you should probably be a lot more upset about what happened to Grayson Rodriguez, because this, not Brandon Hyde bringing in a pinch hitter, but this is something that could have a huge negative impact on the Orioles season. So coming up next to finish off the pod, talk about what the O's would do if they lost Grayson Rodriguez for any amount of time with this lat issue. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Liquid IV. When you're taking in America's pastime, don't forget to hydrate with Liquid IV's Popsicle Firecracker flavor, a surefire summer hit. Get hydrated with electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients from the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. Because baseball and summer, well, they go together like Liquid IV and indulgent hydration. Liquid IV has so many benefits. Really, the best one is you can stay hydrated while you're traveling, going to summer festivals, going to a game, maybe after a night out. It's so quick. It's so easy to hydrate your body. It's just something amazing to have on hand. That's the best part. You tear it, you pour it, you live more. 1 stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. So no more thirsty summers when you indulge in hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. So let's talk Grayson Rodriguez. What we know right now, he was scratched about 10 minutes before Tuesday's scheduled start. The Orioles called it right lat discomfort. Grayson Rodriguez had a lat injury back in 2022. It was a grade 2 lat strain. He got the injury in like June or July, I believe, and it kept him out for essentially the rest of the season. So if it's the severity of that, Grayson could be done for the year. Now, we don't want to get too far yet. Brandon Hyde said after the game, Grayson will go back to Baltimore, get some more testing and imaging done to really determine the severity of this injury. But I'm real nervous about this one. Like, I think the O's have done an amazing job this year of just bouncing back from every injury. Some of these injuries I think have been like detrimental to the clubhouse, just guys being down about their dudes going down with injury. To lose Kyle Bradish, like your ace of the staff at some point, your Cy Young contender from last year, to have him go down. To lose John Means, kind of the veteran heart and soul of this pitching staff. To lose Tyler Wells, who, he has his struggles at times, but can really be a Swiss Army knife for your pitching staff. To lose Danny Coulomb, who I would argue was the best reliever on this Orioles team with Felix Bautista out. To lose Felix Bautista for the entire season, the best closer in baseball. To lose Jorge Mateo, you could argue how much he gives to this team, but he certainly provides a spark. To lose Jordan Westburg, maybe your most consistent player coming not out of nowhere, but just putting together this amazing all-star season. And the Orioles have still found a way through all of that to play good baseball. And yeah, they're a half game back right now, but be a first-place team in the American League East. And Albert Suarez, who was amazing on Tuesday, has been amazing all year in every role he's been given. I mean, for him to step up, you've had to call up Cade Povich. You've had to call up Chase McDermott. You got a really good stretch and then a really bad stretch out of Cole Irvin. You've gone to all of these guys. You've had Grayson Rodriguez at times take his game to another level. You go and get Zach Eflin, which has been helpful so far. You go and get Trevor Rogers, which so far not as great, but hopefully tonight he can right the ship in that one. And, Dean Kramer's done his thing at times, but he's missed some time with injury as well. I mean, it's just been so much to get through. And the Orioles to this point in early August have gotten through it and still look like a team that could win the World Series. If they are without Grayson Rodriguez for the season, if they lose him for an extended amount of time, but he could come back, you put Albert Suarez back in the rotation. You still have your 5. Your depth is now Cade Povich and Cole Irvin behind him. Unfortunately, on the same day, Chase McDermott has a stress fracture in his shoulder, so he's going to miss some time. He might be done for the year probably. So your depth behind it is Cade Povich and Cole Irvin, which is guys, you could still get by with if you have to have them start some major league games. But Albert Suarez can fill in and he can get the O's to the finish line in the regular season. The O's could still win this division with Albert Suarez instead of Grayson Rodriguez in this rotation right now. But in the postseason, if you are going into a series with Burns, Eflin, Kramer, Suarez, or Rogers as your 4 for a starting rotation, that's just not enough to win a World Series. And it's nothing the Orioles could have done. They added 2 starters. You can't go into the deadline thinking you're going to lose one of your best 2 starters to injury. And again, we don't know the severity for Grayson just yet. But this is the injury right here that has worried me the most out of any of them. Because even though Kyle Bradish is a better pitcher than Grayson Rodriguez, and John Means can be better at times, and Coulomb is so good, and Westburg is so important, the O's had something good behind those guys that they could bring in. Behind Grayson Rodriguez, yes, Albert Suarez can certainly step in this spot, but they don't have someone behind Grayson Rodriguez who I feel confident putting in a number 2 spot in a playoff series behind Corbin Burns and the O's still being able to let it rip. Can Zach Eflin be good? Absolutely he can be. Is he a number 2 starter in the playoffs? He is not. He's a guy who you feel good at number 3, but as soon as he moves up to number 2, you start to really worry. I hope that if it is IL time, if it is an injury, maybe it's a month, maybe he can come back in September and be okay. Hopefully it's a very low-grade strain and he can be back from this injury. But if they miss Grayson for an extended amount of time, or if he is out for the season, and I hope not, I don't want to be too doom and gloom on this entire episode, but this is the injury that I think would put the Orioles in a place where it's like, this is too much to overcome. Not saying they couldn't do it. It's an amazing offense. They still have Corbin Burns. Hopefully the bullpen gets better and healthier. But I just think without a guy like Grayson in the playoffs, it becomes really, really tough to get over that hump. Not saying they could do it, that they couldn't do it, and they still could. They still have the talent without Grayson Rodriguez to win a World Series. But because of the having not as much depth behind it now, at this point, with all the other pitching injuries, this is the one that really makes me worry. Now, this team can surprise you in good ways, and they wouldn't surprise me if they just kept on rolling without Grayson Rodriguez. But this one's going to hurt, and we are just hoping for good news from these tests in Baltimore. And I will be back tomorrow to update you on anything new we hear about Grayson Rodriguez, and, of course, recap Game 2 between the Orioles and the Blue Jays. Hopefully the O's can even up this series at 1 game apiece. Trevor Rogers makes start number 2 for the Orioles. He goes up against Bowden Francis, who has not been very good this year, the rookie right-hander. Maybe take the over in this one here on Wednesday night, and then I'll be back on Thursday to update you on Grayson and recap it all from Toronto. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.